On a narrow barrier island off the south shore of Long Island lies Cherry Grove, a small beach town which, through the years, has become the summer capital for America's homosexual community. The story of Cherry Grove is rich in lesbian and gay history. Welcome to Forward and Out. I'm Dr. Zelle Andrews, and here to tell us about this fascinating town is Dr. Esther Newton, author of Cherry Grove, Fire Island, 60 Years in America's First Gay and Lesbian Town. Welcome to the show. Esther, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are now and how you came to write the history of Cherry Grove now.
Well, I guess you could say in part I'm a Westchester native. I've taught here since 1971 at SUNY Purchase. I'm a professor of anthropology. And I came to write this because Cherry Grove, I discovered, was a place that I loved. And I wanted to know. I went there originally to vacation, and because I wanted to be in a gay place, really. And I came to love it and decided to look into its history, which no one had done before.
There's a real nexus, then, between your personal experience of the Grove and your professional life as an anthropologist. Tell us a little bit about the particular distinctiveness of Cherry Grove, that not only because of your personal experience there, but because of your understanding of how unique it was, that made you want to do something more than just participate in it, but to really to describe its history and to situate it in the life of gays and lesbians in the Grove itself, but also in the larger life of lesbians and gay people in this country.
Well, I'm not quite sure where to start on this, except that for a long time, really since graduate school, I've been working on what's now become gay and lesbian studies. And my first book was about female impersonators. And so I've always been interested in these questions about gay and lesbian life, and I'm particularly interested in the social angle, the cultural angle, and history. And I had never seen anything like Cherry Grove. The only thing a little bit like it is Provincetown, but even Provincetown has a lot more straight population, and the Grove is really gay dominated. And I thought, how extraordinary, how did this happen, especially when I realized how much of a community it was, that it wasn't just a strip of hotels or something, but that people really had sunk in their roots and were so fiercely proud of it. And had been some people I found out, then I started meeting people in their 70s and 80s who had been there for 50 years.
You've described it as the world's only geography controlled by gay men and women. This is indeed unusual in a society that is so oppressive to gays and lesbians, so oppressive that one of the most distinctive features of the gay and lesbian community is that it's so hidden.
Right, that's true. Well, now you might say that certain districts, particularly the Castro in San Francisco, is pretty much gay controlled, but for years and years the Grove was the only space. And I think we were talking about this before, that it being a leisure space, I think that was really important. That was where people could hope to be kind of left alone. For example, you have these leisure communities in the Catskills, where other, ethnic minorities and so on could go and kind of develop their own way of life. Now, they weren't under siege from the police, but even so, I think for it to be a resort far away, a little bit inaccessible, made it kind of a logical place for gays to begin to come into their own.
And it really developed in a kind of evolutionary way. It started out as a small fishing village. You pick up its story in the late 20s, early 30s, when it was, and still is to some extent, a combination of straight and gay people. And yet the gay community began in the 40s and 50s to become more predominant there. Tell us a little bit about how that transformation took place.
Well, it started out really with people, gay people and straight people, who were involved with the theater was really the core of it. And also people who were involved in the early years of the New Yorker magazine. And these people kind of all knew each other, like people who would review movies or theater for the New Yorker.
John Mosher was one
John
of them.
Mosher, and these people would know theater people, and so they first even called themselves theater people. And it just so happened that a lot of them were gay. So it didn't start out by they're sort of planting a flag and saying, you know, this is gay space. But from that beginning, it grew and grew, and everything was by word of mouth then. There was no gay press or anything. So everything was by word of mouth. But people started hearing in the New York community that this is a place where gays and lesbians can go. And they started to come to it.
And particularly gay artists.
Yes, in the beginning.
And artists of a number of characteristics. The poet W.H. Auden was there pretty regularly, I gather. Actors and actresses.
Yes, Thelma Ritter.
Right.
Right, Nancy Walker, particularly women. And some of them were gay and some of them were straight. And the male actors tended to be gay more. And people who loved the theater. This was sort of the central institution that they identified with. And as I said, the New Yorker magazine. That was very important.
The whole aspect of theatricality and drama was very much a part of Cherry Grove. And it was such a central part of the lives of the people who were there, and became a particular feature as Cherry Grove became a central place for gay leisure time. Tell us a little bit about that special feature of Cherry Grove. It was becoming a gay place in the 50s and 60s, and they were developing this particular kind of theatricality, particularly camp.
That was there from the beginning, and it was related to this theatrical part. The very first gay parties in the 1930s were theatrical. People would come dressed up in costumes and so on, and then they started to have parties, and the parties got more and more elaborate, and people would dress up and play make-believe, and the first community institution was a theater, which was founded in 1948, right after the war.
With a fair mixture of input and support from the straight community,
Absolutely.
who was part of the life of that community for many years.
Not just part of, but leaders of for many years. Yes, straight people who loved a gay atmosphere, loved the theater, and yes, so very like the Elys and the Farrars who built Pride House. And,
right. There was something special about Cherry Grove that had to do with that development of a sense of freedom, and particularly for the people who were impersonating
for everybody.
Others, and for everybody.
For everybody.
Right.
Gay and straight.
For gay people, there was that special sense that there was a freedom about this that they had nowhere else in the world. Tell us a little bit about that really core sense of the freedom to be themselves when they were there.
Well, at that time, before gay liberation, there was no such thing as being out. People hid and lied. They had to, and every day, every minute, to their families, at their jobs, everything. Not every single person was in that position, but most people were. So this was a place they could come and shed all that and be open and honest, and also be community members. And people treasured it. And one added thing about that is the safety that the women felt, both lesbian and straight, the physical safety that they felt, of not being harassed by men, and being able to go out at night with no problem.
They could hold hands if they wanted to. Nobody was going to beat them up just for walking along the boardwalk with an arm around their partner's shoulder or something. Seems pretty innocent to heterosexuals, but can cost a homosexual their life.
True.
There was also, in addition to this this very dramatic life of Cherry Grove, something else that was very distinctive about it, and that was a sexual freedom.
Yes.
Particularly part of the male life at the Grove. Tell us a little bit about that and what it meant for the people who were there, and what it meant for them as they experienced that freedom to be themselves.
Well, that was an early feature too. I mean, that really began in the after the war, in the late 40s that the men started developing these cruising networks outside, public. By public, I just mean outside, in that there weren't really outside people there, strangers who would just be walking through.
Outdoors.
But it was outdoors,
Yeah.
and this would usually, at first it was always at night, and there were a lot of trees and bushes and stuff like that. But I think the aspect of sexual freedom for the women was important too. Not that they would have these outdoor nighttime networks where people could meet each other, but at parties, and maybe women saw it more as romance. The freedom to conduct romances without being afraid all the time.
They had a unique freedom there as well to buy homes, to become
Yes.
part of the community in
Very
ways that they were,
important.
because they were so hidden in other parts of their lives.
Very important.
They became establishment homeowners, consistent
Yes.
renters, participants in protecting the dunes and other parts of the environment. They became
Right.
the leaders of the community, and it really became their town.
That's a very good way of putting it. They became part of the they became the establishment where they could be nowhere else because they were so marginalized. And these were people who were exiles in their own country, and this was the only place where they could be citizens.
The developing commercialism of the Grove, as it became more and more a known
Right.
piece of geography, changed the Grove through the decades, and there was some tension between the establishment, the old gays, and the new day trippers who would come over on the ferry, and a typical sort of tension between the old establishment and the new folks, and they were bringing lots of things with them. They were changing the socialization and the way it occurred. Duffy's Hotel used to be a sort of laid-back
In-groupy.
Yeah.
Kind of in-groupy. And then it became more open, especially with gay literature in the 1960s. A lot more gays found out about it and started to come. And I think the old-timers, what made them the most uptight really was the degree of commercialism that hadn't been there before.
It also brought new life in some ways, though.
It did.
The disco dancing.
Right, it did. Drugs,
Drugs.
which the old-timers weren't so happy with either, like most old-timers.
In spite of this happy, unique place where gays could be themselves, they were not entirely free
True.
from the experience of oppression that was more consistent with their lives elsewhere. By the time the developing assertiveness that ultimately resulted in the Stonewall Rebellion in 1968, there was a fair amount of gay bashing from
Yes.
straights
Yes.
and from the police. Tell
Yes.
us about how that uneasy relationship worked in a gay community. It was still going on.
It was. That really started after the war, when really a lot of young gay people came in after World War II. And the straight people who were in control at the time started to get uptight about it. And they had these nude bathing suit arrests and so on. And that harassment from the police that came over from Long Island, that lasted until 1968. So it lasted about 20 years. And certainly in the 60s it was pretty severe. People were led away, had to go over to the police on the mainland and had their names published in the paper. So there was always that, still there was a degree of fear, which doesn't exist anymore.
Finally, it came to an end.
1968, a year before Stonewall.
I'd like to explore a little bit about Stonewall and that the developing consciousness of the community and its assertiveness. But before we get into that, there's something different about women's experience there, as lesbians, than the male experience.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what it was like to be a lesbian there and how it differed from being a gay male.
Well, there's been an ebb and flow on that. In the 1940s and 50s, the lesbians who were there tended to be rather elite. They had professions or money somehow, and they participated very fully in the life of the community. They were maybe a quarter to a third at times of the community, and very active in the theater, and there was a lot of acceptance, and it wasn't a very tense relationship with the men.
Mm-hmm.
But
which is unique, is it not? It's a special kind of...
Well, I don't know. I don't think we know too much about that yet. Mm-hmm. We need more research on that.
More anthropology there.
Well, more history, more anthropology.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually think that before the 1970s, there were many places where gay men and lesbians got along very well. Mm-hmm. Lots of towns where there was only one gay bar, mm-hmm. and that's where everyone went, and they all got along.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure how unusual that was before the 1970s, but in the 60s in the Grove, it became very much male. And that's the first time I went there in 66 or 67. And my impression was that it was all men, pretty much. I mean, there were some other women at the bar, but that it was a very male space, which is one reason why I didn't go back that much.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I didn't get along with men, I did, but it was just seemed like not lesbian friendly or something.
Mm-hmm.
But then later on in the 70s, lesbians started coming back again because, let's face it, there's an enduring appeal
mm-hmm. and
of
apparently,
gay space.
Yes. It more than was true in other areas of American society. It was also more friendly to people of color and to ethnics. It took a bit of time for that to occur. But it's certainly been my experience, and I guess ultimately yours there at the Grove, as you describe it, that although the tensions existed and it was not free from racism or sexism in any way that we could say the rest of society was, there was a degree of interaction, simply because there was this basic gay identity that helped the community be at least more open, and the opportunity to participate in these dramatic events also had a great deal to do with the sense of solidarity growing. And
particularly for ethnic gay men, primarily, a lot of them became accepted through the theater. Mm-hmm. And participating in the theater. There was more racism, and that's been sort of an enduring issue, yet in some ways you could say that it was ahead of the outside society because of this common gay identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about an interesting argument that you've made, that Stonewall would not have occurred had it not been for the existence of Cherry Grove and the solidarity that developed there. This seems to me to be a special perspective that we need to understand about what we understand today to be gay nationalism, and those that experience it today have no concept of its not being there, and yet it wasn't there for a time. Tell us about what it was about Cherry Grove that made Stonewall and the resistance to the police raids and the oppression possible.
I think that Cherry Grove, the existence of Cherry Grove, gave many, many gay people in the New York area particularly the idea of gay space and gay self-control. I'm not saying that, maybe if Cherry Grove hadn't existed, we would have had to invent something just like it. Mm-hmm. But it was, and in fact, some people have told me that it was very much in their minds, people who were active in gay liberation in the 60s, leading up to Stonewall, that we wanted something like this. This is a space for us. And you would see that in the literature about Cherry Grove in the 60s, our space and this kind of thing. And I think this was kind of a laboratory where this idea developed. It was a very important place for this idea to develop, that we are a people, we have our own culture, we can control our destiny. That is manifested in a different way with Stonewall and then the political organizations that happened.
And yet the Grove was resistant to the early political organizing.
It was.
Tell us a little bit about why that happened.
I think in part that people in the Grove felt that life is so hard, so difficult on the mainland, that we must keep this place free. Mm-hmm. We've got to pretend like that oppression doesn't exist. And so this place is about fantasy, a fantasy of being free. And I think that was probably the single biggest reason. Another reason is people were becoming property owners, and property owners tend to be a little more conservative. I could go on, but it's a complicated issue. But
today, what's the Grove like, briefly?
it's still wonderful. It has become more open. There's more diversity, people of color. There are many more lesbians. I would say about half the renters now are lesbians, which is kind of amazing and wonderful.
And I gather the political atmosphere is more self-conscious, more certain.
Yes, there's been a real reconciliation. There are rainbow flags everywhere, and people planning the gay games and Stonewall and celebration and all that. Yes, I think a lot of it's coming together now, both the sort of cultural aspect of being gay, the theatricality and having fun, with the political part is really coming together there now. What's
happened with AIDS and its effect on Cherry Grove?
AIDS has been very devastating in the Grove and also in the Pines, which is the somewhat more affluent community that's about a quarter of a mile away and is largely gay. In fact, part of Longtime Companion, that movie was filmed there in the Pines, and it's been very devastating. A lot of people have died, and there's been a lot of mourning. And now there's been a lot of organizing to raise money for causes and so on. And yet I was very happy to see, I was just out over Memorial Day, and there are loads of young people coming in now. So for a while people were afraid that it might be lost as a gay space, but I don't think that's going to happen.
That's not your perception, though.
No, they're coming back like crazy.
And the homeowners are still in control? And the homeowners are still predominantly gay and lesbian?
Yes. Yes, it's still a wonderful place with one of the greatest beaches in the world. A great place to go just for the day. You can get there by train and ferry, and to feel freer and safe.
What about the theatricality? Are there still those stupendous productions and elaborate dressing up and costumes that were so much a part of the early
Not
life?
really. For the moment, that has abated for the last about 20 years.
It's been that long.
Yeah, it has. It's been much more evident in the Pines, which is the next community over, but the big event is the invasion of the Pines, which takes place over July 4th. And a lot of people dress up for that in both the Pines and the Grove and have fun with it.
A big costume party.
It's a great big costume party, yeah.
I see.
It's a fun thing.
Sounds like fun. Esther, we want to thank you for being on the show.
Glad to be here.
This is a special book, which I hope people will have an opportunity to examine and to learn not only something about Cherry Grove, but about the history of the gay and lesbian community in this country. It is probably a surprise for many to know that we really have to create spaces of our own in order to feel simply safe in this world. And apparently Cherry Grove was one of those places where we did it. I gather you're not there regularly as a renter or as a homeowner anymore.
No.
What caused you to move on?
One thing was I left after the '89 season, and for one thing, a lot of people that I was very involved with died, so they were elderly. And for another, I needed to get away a little bit to write my book. I needed a little perspective. So now I'm starting to go back again. I'm renting for 2 weeks this summer, and I still love the Grove.
Well, you will come back then as the community's historian, a very unique kind of place. You have an opportunity not only to see where it's been, but where it is now.
Right. The community deserves a historian.
Well, it has one, and I gather this is the only gay community at this point, at least in terms of leisure communities, that has that kind of...
Yes, but I hope there's a graduate student out there somewhere who is working away.
Well, you've given them a good opportunity to see what it's like to do this kind of work and particularly in terms of not only your experience there, but your professional background as an historian and anthropologist. Again, we want to thank you for being with us and for sharing a little bit of a very large and significant cultural history of Cherry Grove. I think that we are all the better for the very substantial work that you've done in sharing your life there and your research with us. Many thanks.
Glad to be here.
We hope that you've enjoyed the show. Thanks for watching, and send your comments to Forward and Out, care of the LOFT, Post Office Box 1513 in White Plains, New York 10602, or call the LOFT's helpline at 914-948-4922. And stay tuned for the LOFT's Community Bulletin Board directly following the closing credits of the show.